Hi, everybody. We're really glad to have you guys back again at Influencer Academy. Today is going to be super awesome, very timely as you guys are getting ready to get back into the fall season. You're building out different themes for your different sports. We have Mallory Heiser from Bowling Green. She's the director of creative services over there, and she's done a really good job with all of their themes and their designs and just really anything content creation wise that they've done in the last couple of years. She's done a really good job at just enhancing all of it and taking it to the next level. So this will be a really exciting one for you guys today. She's got some awesome slides together. So without further ado, I'm going to let her get started.
Well, thank you. That was super nice. I hope I can live up to it. So I'm the Director of Creative Services at BGSU Athletics. We are in Ohio, Bowling Green State University, not Bowling Green, Kentucky. People get confused with that a lot. And also, I just want to point out, like right from the get-go, if anybody has any questions for me, just go ahead and toss them in the chat or in the questions tab. So just a little bit of background on me. I am a BGSU alum. I graduated in 2018 with visual communication technology, and I focused in photography. Initially had absolutely no plans in working in the sport industry, let alone as a graphic designer. So kind of wild that I'm out here. A little bit about our department setup. It's me and a part-time paid assistant, and then a whole little army of interns. So I'm overseeing our brand, our graphics, our social, photo, all of that kind of stuff on a daily basis. And then something I think that's really important to kind of this brand building idea too is that we have a lot of coaches and students working on things. So it's not always just me. Some of our assistant coaches do a really, really great job. For example, our men's soccer coach does an outstanding job with their content. And having a really strong seasonal brand built out and explained is so important. So if you want to go ahead and click to the next slide for me. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about our football brand from last fall. If anybody saw any of it, I'm going to kind of explain what our rationale is. So if you want to go to the next slide for me. The first thing that's always most important to me as I'm building out a brand is making sure that everything is identifiable as Bowling Green first and foremost. I want people as they're scrolling or as they're seeing stuff out like in the wild to know that it's Bowling Green State University without really having to see a logo. Obviously, logo is always going to be on everything. It's really important, but I want the brand to stick out that much. So part of our brand as a department is we don't really have like landmarks or geography or like a really cool tiger mascot. Freddie's cool, the Falcon's cool, but we don't really have a lot of those really, really cool things that we can lean on. So we've kind of tried to find a way to make a really cool and identifiable brand without having some of those things. And for us, that's leaning into orange and brown. We are the only FBS team in the country that is orange and brown. So we're really unique in that way. And I try really, really hard to like portray that in our graphics. Another thing about our brand is that we try to make it really timeless. We are not building it around coaches or players or anything like that. We're trying to make it so that the brand stands alone. And as coaches come and go, as players come and go, as people come and go, it stays the same. So some fundamental parts of everything before I get really into the actual football brand is just that as a department, we're using bold typography. We're leaning into the orange a lot because our shade is kind of unique and I think it sticks out a lot, especially on the timeline. If you want to go to the next slide for me. So example of kind of our color palette and what this looks like. You can go to the next slide. And then fonts, like I said, typography is a really big part of what we're doing on a daily basis. So you are always going to see these three fonts. Very rarely are you going to see anything else. Universe is tip top. It's the campus font as well. So we match them in that way. We have really, really specific guidelines for our fonts and things like that. So that way they're legible and we try to make things as ADA compliant as possible. But these are some of the like foundational building blocks. You're going to see this in essentially every sports content, every season. Okay, next slide. So today we're talking Falcon football. Like I said, our brand this year or this past season was Follow the Blueprint. And that is something that my intern or my assistant actually came up with because Coach Leffler says it all the time. I'm sure everybody, maybe not everybody knows, but we've been in a little bit of a rebuild as far as our football program goes. And Coach says, follow the blueprint, follow the blueprint. It's all the time. So we really wanted our seasonal brand to be something that reflected what the coaches, what the staff, what the team has bought into, and reflect that in what everybody else is seeing on social media. So part of that is the grid lines, it's the textures, it's the paper look, bringing in like plastics and things, just finding different ways to really get that portrayed. You can go to the next slide. So like while we were trying to figure out how we were going to do this, we sat down, my assistant and I, and we broke down, what does follow the blueprint mean? Scott Leffler, the head coach, he's also very into this branding of to the moon, which makes it a little bit complicated sometimes from a design standpoint because our like arch nemesis in the MAC is Toledo and they're the Rockets. So Leffler is always saying like to the moon, to the moon. And while that's totally an awesome like standpoint for the team and like a really cool objective and something they all say, we wanted to kind of play into that without having like rockets and stuff everywhere and kind of looking like our biggest rival. So that was another way that follow the blueprint could kind of come into play because it goes over with all this overall theme of the team. So part of this was bringing in just like truly blueprint assets, right? So arrows, lines, the grid, anything that we could use that would be reflective, but not necessarily like in your face. And then if we can go to, there we go. So pulling in typography and making it work with our blueprint look and really manipulating that, I think was something that really made our seasonal brand stand out. Playing with typography is a little bit more on par with my background as someone who worked at an ad agency. The sport world was a little bit different for me in terms of coming somewhere where like the natural aesthetic is cutting players out and having like a whole bunch of movement and players and stuff like that. And a lot of people aren't necessarily always playing with typography. And I think that's something that makes BG's brand really identifiable. And so to talk a little bit more just about why we picked the blueprint look, something I do when I'm planning out what a brand looks like, or when I'm talking about branding with a client or anything like that, is like, what is the brand? So I'm asking these questions of like, what are we trying to convey? What does coach want the public to know? What does coach want fans to know? Like, what do we want people to know about our program or our team or our department that you don't necessarily know unless we're telling you? So for us, that was this to the moon and follow the blueprint. We like I said, we really wanted to build into something that the team was really bought into, and that made this so much easier. Like we didn't have to force this look. We didn't have to like put follow the blueprint on literally everything because it was just something that came naturally and something that we could easily work into. So in addition to obviously the graphic stuff, a lot of this was photography. So I am our only full-time photographer at BGSU in terms of athletics. So I'm shooting our games, I'm doing our headshots, I'm doing our poster shoots. And while it can be kind of a lot, it also puts me in a really good position where I know the items that we're working with. I know the photos that we have, I know what kind of photos we need. So it makes my job a little bit easier in a lot of ways. But we again lean into the really loud, bold, and expressive photography with our brand and try to keep, what we're doing on from a graphic standpoint, very similar to what we're doing from a photography standpoint. It's not just, putting follow the blueprint or putting blueprint assets into graphics. It's also showing that building, right? So it's, we're following the blueprint, but we're building something here and we're posting photos and we're taking photos of the student athletes building something. And I think all these little parts and pieces go really well together. And I think that's something that like really denotes like a successful seasonal brand, is when all of your little bits and pieces are working together. Um, Another thing that plays into that is like our social cadence. So when I'm talking about building a brand, I'm not just talking about obviously the social or the graphic stuff or the colors or the typography. It's also the overall brand of the team for that season. What are we talking about? What are we telling people about? So social cadence was huge. Um, every single post was pushing that follow the blueprint idea, even if it wasn't saying that. So it was showing the team working, it was showing the team changing the culture and what we were about as a football team, and not just, you know, the pretty graphics and stuff like that. So I think that's such an important part of the brand that sometimes people maybe don't think about, and maybe um it's because there's a lot of different, like a lot of different people are doing a lot of different projects. I just happen to be the lucky person who gets to do almost all of them here at BG, so it's easy for me to make it cohesive. But I think that's something that's so important that can get missed a lot. So here are just some examples of what our brand kind of looks like. This was just like a mood board, stuff that I put together to pitch to our football staff. So shared this with our director of football operations and made sure from a team standpoint that they were on board with what we wanted to do. Obviously, it's very basic. Like, we're just showing kind of our overall ideas, what the fonts would look like, what we're playing with here, kind of shapes and things like that. We used a lot of circles and a lot of like circular manipulated text, just to kind of play into the moon idea. I have no idea if anyone else ever caught on to that, but it made me happy to know that that was something I was playing into. So, you know, it's the little things as a designer sometimes. And then just examples of kind of what that looked like actually like during the season. So playing into the game day stuff, bringing in just little bits and pieces of the blueprint, bringing in like crop marks and cut lines and the grid lines, and using shapes and stuff that you would see like reflected on blueprints. I don't know, I'm not an architect. I did a little bit of research, so I assume. But also playing into the really loud and bright photography. You know, I'm doing these poster shoots and these white screen shoots and planning our photography around some of the stuff we're going to do, to again have the expressive and the emotive shots that we're looking for, that go again into the brand building. So then next, just kind of wanted to show a little bit what that brand has evolved into over the last couple of months. So now that the football season hasn't actually like really been in season, obviously they're doing spring and stuff like that, but just a little bit of an evolution. When it comes to branding, especially in the sport world, I'm sure we all know how quickly everything evolves. Somebody overnight is going to come up with like the newest, coolest piece of design, and it's kind of up to us as graphic designers and people who are responsible for a brand to evolve with that. So I am a huge believer in letting a brand breathe and grow and live, and letting things evolve. I think if we're not kind of evolving, it's getting a little stagnant. And I fully don't expect what we're generating at the beginning of the season to look like what we're generating at the end of the season. I think seeing that growth is really important for me, my interns, and my assistant director. We want to stay on brand. Like, you'll see a lot of things reflected, like playing with typography, and like what fonts we're using and how we're using them, and we're repeating things, but it's definitely growing and evolving and changing throughout the season, and I think that's really, really important. That's really all I have prepared. If anybody has questions, I would love to hear them. I think it would be pretty boring for me to just like sit here and talk at you for like forever. So if anybody has questions, please ask. I am an open book. Okay, so do we rebrand each year or season? A little bit. So like I said, I'm a huge fan of letting things evolve and breathe. So definitely from maybe a football perspective, we are rebranding and changing every season. just to keep it fresh. That's what recruits are looking for. Just in my experience from the interactions that I've had with them, they want to see things change. They want to see the next coolest thing. So definitely from a football perspective, we are essentially rebranding every single season. From a departmental standpoint, we are not doing a total rebrand. It's always just a little bit of a shift, a little bit of an evolution. You will look at things and you'll be able to see a lot of the same components being reused. And I think that's important from like an overall athletic department standpoint, is to have a strong foundation. But no, I think it just depends. It really just depends on the team or like what the department or anything like that. My go-to camera setup for game photos. I am a Canon girl at heart. I've always shot Canon. Whenever I've used Nikon, I've not loved it, and we don't really have the budget for Sony, which is unfortunate. But we shoot Canon, so we have one camera for myself and my interns to share, and we use it's a Mark. It's a it's a 5D Mark II, I think, or something like that. I will be honest with you, while I love photography and I'm like, it's a huge part of what I do, I'm not big on like the specs of the equipment. I have a friend that I ask, hey, what do I need? And he tells me and I buy it. But we do that. And then we have a 1 to 600 Sigma lens that's done really great for us with a Canon mount. And then we have a 300 Canon lens. Like, we're working with bare minimum, bare bones equipment over here. So anything you're seeing that we're posting photography wise is done with one camera and like 3 different lenses. And then I know like you didn't ask about game pics, but in terms of like white screen photography, we have like some white backdrops, we have black, we have green, and then we have an orange one that doesn't get used very often, but I do like a clamshell lighting. So we have 2 soft boxes. We do like a modified clamshell for anyone who's like looking to get more into like strobe lighting and stuff like that. And just that one, we have like a Westcott kit, has been huge in terms of just like elevating our photography for white screen stuff. What is some advice you would have for someone who doesn't have a team and has to do everything you explained as one person? So, that's what I was like when I started, actually. So I didn't have an assistant. My assistant, Morgan, she's incredible, but last fall was her first year with us, and it was the first time I ever had a paid position and someone to help me out. So before that, I was doing essentially everything by myself, as the photographer, as the social media manager, as the brand coordinator, and then also as like the only full-time graphic designer. So the biggest thing that I can say is just time management is really, really important. We have a project management system that I use. It's called Trello. It's free. I think I instituted it week 1 because I was getting so many email requests and there was so much going on that I just couldn't keep track of it. So my coworkers call me Trellery, actually, as a nice little joke, because I almost will refuse to do anything unless it's submitted as a request. So that's like the biggest thing for me. And then also just like guard your mental health big time. As graphic designers and content creators, burnout is so very real and so very prominent with us. I mean, people are leaving the industry in like a mass exodus. So for me, it's protect yourself. If you're feeling like you don't have the resources or the time to complete the things that are being requested of you, communicate that. Because a lot of times people who are managing creatives, they don't always know what your limits are, or if, you know, they think they're asking for something really small, but they're asking for a really big project, and just being honest and respectful, but being honest about what that looks like and what you can manage. Can you talk through what photo shoot media days look like for your teams? Okay, I talked a little bit about that, but I'll go back to it. So we actually just had like headshot day yesterday for football. So we block out a period of time. All of our teams, unless there's a few exceptions, but almost every single team is shot on the same backdrop. They're all the same exact little angled pose. Everybody is going to be like cropped from here up. We try to keep it all as similar as possible for the website. Now, obviously, ESPN has like straight on requests and stuff like that. So we do a little bit different things for TV. but pretty much everything will look the same across the teams. I mentioned my lighting setup a little bit. We have I use flash, so we have 2 lights. They are self-contained, and I have 2 really big rectangular soft boxes on them to soften the light a little bit. I don't use any diffusers. If anybody knows what I'm talking about, I like kind of the harsher lighting look for sports. I don't like it to be too soft. And then for poster shoots, we've got a real big white backdrop. I think it's like something like 15, 20 feet long. And I manage all of those. I like to come up with like a shot list and things like that and examples because I'm terrible. Any of our student athletes will tell you I'm terrible at telling them how I want them to pose. I'm a lot better at either showing them, which I'm sure they think is hilarious, or like pointing out a picture. Do you take a similar approach with all the other teams you work with, or do they sort of inherit the blueprint look for consistency? Football's brand will kind of always set the look a lot of times because it's the one that gets done first because they start everything so early. And I'm sure, as everybody knows, football is such a beast. There is a little bit of a trickle down effect, but we try to give each team a little bit of their own identity, especially when it comes to like a ticketed sport. So volleyball will have a little bit of its own identity. Hockey has its own identity because the sport culture for hockey is so much different than everything else. But we really, really try to give everybody their own little bit of personality, but still keeping it within the brand. And you'll see, again, the little bits and pieces you'll see reflected everywhere. So the crop marks, the bleed marks, the way we're playing with fonts, the way we're using like the borders and stuff like that. Like you see that reflected everywhere, even if it's not always done in the same composition or in the same way. What is a typical football game day like for me? Okay, so I'll talk home games. I don't always travel for like in conference road games for football just because it is just me and we have 18 sports. So oftentimes if football's on the road, we've got something else big at home that I'm managing. But for a home game, I normally get here 3 or 4 hours early because I don't want to deal with parking, and I like to grab a coffee and like a bagel on the way in. And I get started up in the press box. So I get everything ready to go. My assistant is normally the one who is editing our templates now. Before I was doing it all on my own, but our assistant is editing the templates in game. So I get those set up for her more often than not. I try to like have everything like turned over for the next game. So that way all she has to do is kind of just edit it in game. But she's up in the press box doing that. And I am often, if you're in our conference, you'll see me running up and down the stadium or up and down the elevator, shooting the game on the field, and then coming back up to get our content up to the press box because we don't have any fancy photo sharing systems at this point. So I get a lot of steps in on football game days, but it's doing that there for pregame, shooting all of that kind of stuff, trying to make sure we're capturing social media content as well. So I have student interns who are like mandated to be at the game, give them their like assignments of where they're going to be and what kind of content I want from that game. It kind of depends on, is it homecoming? Is it a rivalry game? That kind of thing. Making sure that they're getting it, making sure I'm getting photos to them if we need to post them. Like I said, running back up and getting Morgan the photos in the press box so that she can tweet stuff. And then sometimes, depending on how the game's going, I'm also live tweeting the football game. So it can be really different, but I think that's like a typical day. And then what do you enjoy designing and researching in your personal time to stay refreshed and inspired? So I follow tons and tons of like really, I would say out there like design accounts on Instagram. So one's called like Nervous Wreck Collective. And they just do really like wild off the wall designs that are like nothing that you normally see in sports. So I would say a lot of what I'm looking at and browsing and consuming from a graphic or branding standpoint when I'm not working has nothing to do with sports. It's all very much corporate design or like album covers or just really cool wonky stuff. And I feel like that's starting to kind of get reflected in the way I design, but we're rolling with it. Do you experience some hurdles or challenges when building out the foundational brand for the athletic department as a whole? Yeah, I definitely do. I think it can be really hard to be essentially a 1.5 person shop. Like I said, my assistant, she's part-time. So it can be kind of difficult to just be a person trying to convey to a department of non-creatives what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, on top of all the other things that I'm doing all the time. So I think that's definitely a hurdle. I have an incredible department. BG is so supportive of creatives. I think we might have been one of the first teams in the Mid American Conference to kind of add a full-time designer creative role. I don't have stats on that, so nobody call me out, but I think we were kind of on the cusp of that. So that's been really nice, but it can be difficult. I mean, I'm trying to manage the brand of 18 teams, and one of my biggest hurdles is when we do have some teams that want to generate their own content, and they kind of go rogue and are just doing their own thing and haven't met with me, or there's things that are posted that I maybe wouldn't have approved without some like tweaks or changes. So sometimes I think those conversations can be the hardest for me, because as a creative, I don't want to knock the work that like these people have put into what they're doing, because they care about it and they love doing design work, and that's why they're doing it for their team. But just trying to find that happy medium of like critiquing but not making them feel like they don't have the freedom to kind of create. Where do I find my assets, textures, etc.? Okay, so the one, I'm going back to a slide here that I use all the time. So there's a texture on this slide, the like film grain looking one. I don't even remember where I got that. I think I bought it like personally in some sort of asset pack like 2 or 3 years ago, and I use it on everything. Like if you see if you see like a texture or something kind of applied, it's probably that. We buy some textures and fonts and stuff like that. Like Joyride is not a free font. Like we purchased that. We have the rights to that. But to be honest with you, I make a lot of stuff because we don't have a huge creative budget. I actually just got one for the first time last fall, along with Morgan as my assistant. So a lot of my assets and textures I'm creating. I love using Camera Raw and Photoshop and adding like grain and like kind of playing with things that way. Most of our backgrounds are all just gradients. The orange is just a gradient I threw together. Some of them have like the pixelated like stuff to it, but most of that I'm creating on my own in Photoshop. And if you would have asked me like 4 years ago when I started here if I would be like making my own textures and stuff, I would have laughed because I had no idea what I was doing. So if anyone has more questions about kind of like how I do that, or like feel free to DM me on Twitter or anything like that. How many revisions were made when coming up with the brand? Was there a lot of trial and error? Not really, no. So in terms of just like ideation, again, the department and my boss, who's the assistant AD for marketing, they're very supportive. Everybody is really supportive of kind of what we're going to do. Like I said, sometimes it can be complicated to try to explain what and why, but especially with like this football brand, it was so easy. Everybody was almost immediately on board. People come out to practice a lot. They hear Scott talking about things. So it was pretty easy from that standpoint. But from the standpoint of figuring out how to kind of put it on paper without looking cheesy, I guess, like really like a cheesy blueprint, that was a little bit harder. So it was a lot of just playing with grids and playing with, does this look better on our white background? Does it look better on our orange background? That kind of thing was a little bit more complicated. When going from taking photos to editing to posting, is there advice on file sharing or asset storage that you recommend? So I edit in Lightroom. Our presets are all presets that I created kind of on my own through trial and error. And I could not repeat to you the process of how I've gotten to where I am now. It's just been a lot of tweaking and playing and learning how to make a preset that works with like my style of sports photography. So I always edit in Lightroom. It's probably not the most effective. It's not the quickest. I don't necessarily always batch edit. I'm a lot of times going through photo by photo, which takes a while. So I could be a lot quicker in that standpoint, but I just really like looking at each picture and kind of like making sure each one is the best that it can be. So that's something I need to work on for workflow. And then asset storage. We store everything in a couple of places. I have an external hard drive that I store a lot of stuff on, especially for bigger games, not everything because it's only like 2 terabytes. But we also back everything up on Dropbox. Every photo shoot, every game, every practice, it's all backed up on Dropbox. And then we have INFLCR. obviously. So influencer has been huge, and I'm not just saying that in terms of getting content to our student athletes. How do you balance what gets posted on the main account versus team accounts on social media? Um, we kind of go at it as the content that's like very important to a team or very team specific is going to the team. So a football schedule release is going to go out from football because it's the football team. The main account is going to like signal boost that. They're going to share it. They're going to I don't know why I'm saying there, we're going to share it and retweet it or repost it and stuff like that, or maybe even post it a second time. But that initial touch is always going to come from that team account. And I think that's really important in terms of helping grow a team account. It's just one of those things, in my opinion, and in my experience, that people who are football fans are following the football account. They're not necessarily always following the overall athletic account. So I want to meet them where they're at, if that makes sense. So we kind of we go team to team, and then any general promotional stuff is normally from the main account. So I know I said like if it's football, it goes out from football, but if it's a promotional, like if we're talking about a pink game for football and we're just promoting it, that's normally going to go out from the athletic account. Follow the blueprint is something that has more tangible elements to it. How would you come up with assets elements for a phrase that doesn't have a direct correlation to something physical like a blueprint? That's like the problem with our brand overall, I think, or not necessarily the problem, but the challenge that I kind of face. So exactly, like when you think about BG, we don't have a really cool cityscape. We don't have a cool skyline. Like I said, our mascot's cool, but it's not the same as, being able to pull in, like if you're LSU and you have a tiger or something like that. We really just kind of have our colors, in my opinion. So playing into that, and I've built, my interns and I and my assistant, we've built a look out of being loud. And we're in the G5. We got to make a splash. We're surrounded, we've got Ohio State, we've got Michigan. Like we're kind of sandwiched into this area where there are a lot of really big athletic brands. And so how do we compete with that? We don't necessarily, right? But like, how do we at least become identifiable and noticeable? And a lot of that is just consistency. It's finding out what works for us. And for us, it really is the orange and leaning into that and being loud and being noticeable and stopping people from scrolling. And the photography. So that's kind of just what we've built our brand around, is like that loud, that expressive brand presence. I hope that was a good answer. I hope that kind of like helps, because you're right. Follow the blueprint was like easy peasy, and nothing else really ever is for us in terms of like a branding standpoint. How do you adjust for football games where the weather isn't always sunny, and how do you keep it the same brand or style, like vibrant colors? Yeah, that's really hard, actually. You'll definitely hear me grumbling if you're around on like a cloudy day or night games. That's something that I'm adjusting to, because as I mentioned earlier, my style of photography really is that I'm shooting with the sun at my back, hard angles, hard shadows. I'm shooting bright, because that there's something about like that orange and the blue sky and that look, I think really, really helps us stand out. But it can be really complicated when it's cloudy and adjusting to that. So for me, that's been changing the way that I shoot on like a cloudy game day. So I'm not necessarily as worried about the sun, because the sun's not out, it's cloudy, but I'm worried more about kind of my camera settings and less about where the sun is, where like if it's a sunny day, I'm worried about where the sun is. So shooting a little bit softer. I have different presets for cloudy days. I have different presets for if I'm shooting in our basketball arena versus shooting in our gymnastics arena versus shooting in our field house. I definitely have a whole bunch of the same preset, just shifted. And a lot of that was just trial and error. And the big thing is just making sure the orange still pops, even if we don't have that really bright blue, vibrant look. How often do you use refresh your mood boards? So I would say from like a branding standpoint, like what I showed in this presentation, I don't really refresh it that often. I have it printed and hanging back behind me. You might be able to see it. on my bulletin board so I can look at it, but I don't really refresh it as the season goes. Now, I do have like a Pinterest board for the seasons or for the sports that I'm constantly adding to, and you can kind of see that evolution as like time has gone on of where we started and where we're taking it. But I kind of get all my thoughts together in one place at one time and I look at it, but I don't really update it again after that. Maybe I should start doing that. Is your process for creating themes, designs for recruiting graphics the same? Also, are those largely templated, or do you typically create individualized graphics for each recruit? Okay, so I don't do recruiting graphics for football or any of our sports, actually. I take care of National Signing Day and our signing day stuff, but I don't do any of our recruiting content. I have in the past helped out, made templates and stuff like that, but I'm sure as everybody here knows, the demand from football recruiting is so incredibly huge that I just wouldn't be able to manage it on top of all of the other responsibilities that I have. So I oversee the person who does that content. They don't report directly to me, but I am every graphic before it goes out, I review and I make sure it's on brand. I make sure it looks good. I make sure it's something that like fits with the brand of not only BG football, but with the athletic department as a whole. So that way, you know, we can keep an eye on maybe anything that could be questionable or something that maybe the people think we should be touting, that maybe it doesn't really fit with our brand. So I don't create any of that stuff, but they do typically kind of bounce off of the brand that we're creating so that it is at least a little bit cohesive so that people can look at that recruiting graphic and then look at, you know, our game day graphic and know that it came from the same school. Morgan has my assistant. I stole her from, she was the previous recruiting designer. I stole her after she graduated from football. She's incredible. She does the coolest stuff and she did an incredible job of staying on brand, but also doing really cool, fun things. So I think that's a really big part of recruiting and why it's so demanding and why I've become really hands off in terms of the actual creation is because it's hard to template a lot of that stuff. Like a lot of it is just what's timely, what's trending, what's really cool, because you're targeting like 15, 16-year-olds. So they want to see what's really cool right now in the moment. So like I said, I don't really have hands on that, but that's the approach that typically that designer takes. How many hours did I put in a week before getting an assistant? A lot, like a lot. It's still a lot, as everybody knows about working in sports, but I think it was nearly every single night. You know, it was a full day, whatever home event we have, because I have to be at all of our home events in addition to, you know, what I'm doing in the office, because I do have like the actual job. And then a lot of times it was going home and creating more content until like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, especially during that really fun COVID season where everything was happening at once. I probably couldn't count. It was 60, 70. I have no idea. It was a lot. And I'm really glad that Morgan is back and helping me. How do you handle negative feedback on a design from a coach since they are not necessarily an expert in that field? Working in recruiting, I've dealt with that from time to time. So yeah, I definitely deal with that. I work really closely with a lot of our coaches or just anyone who's creating content, but I meet with almost every team, like a representative from every team, either weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. So this is something that I've gotten really used to. I think it's finding a balance in terms of like what is a legitimate, they feel that this isn't a good representation of their team or their program. And kind of meeting them halfway or making an adjustment for them because they do know their team, they know their program. And I may not necessarily know their team or their program the way that they do. In fact, I definitely don't. And then there's also them having an opinion on something that maybe they don't necessarily understand because they're not a graphic designer and because they're a coach and that's their specialty. So I think the longer I've done this, the better I've gotten at kind of seeing what is a legitimate concern about the representation of their program to the public and what is them being a little bit nitpicky, because coaches are nitpicky. That's why they're coaches. It's kind of a personality trait for them. And just, if I have to put my foot down, I've gotten pretty good at putting my foot down. And like I said, I have great bosses and a great administration that 99.9% of the time has my back on the decisions that I'm making. How do you find a balance between fun content and informational content? I think it's just kind of knowing what's what. There are definitely times where I'm making graphics and they can't be fun and they're just informational and they just have text on them. And, it's not like my favorite thing that I've ever created. It's just going out because it has to go out and we need to get that stuff out there. But I don't know that there is, like, I think the balance is truly just knowing, where you can spend your time and where you should spend your time and where you kind of have to just get something out, right? So like, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on like a weekly award. So like a conference award. We're going to have a template for that. And almost always it's going to be the SID updating that template. So like for me, that's like an informational piece of content. Like so and so won this conference player of the week thing. It's awesome. We're really proud of it. We're making a graphic for it, but they're so regular and so repetitive across both like the MAC and the CCHA that it's just not something we're going to make a new one for every single time. It's just not feasible. I hope that helps. What is your strategic approach to pitching seasonal themes and big projects to coaches, admins? So depending on the team, so I'm going to speak specifically to football for this just because it's kind of what we've been talking about the whole time. I talked to the director of football operations. She is our point of contact for the team. So she's often the go-between. Like I have a great relationship with our head coach and our coaching staff, but she is the go-between. So I have a meeting with her. I kind of find out, maybe what the coaches are looking for, what they want, kind of what they're thinking, what they want recruits to be knowing, what they want fans and all that kind of thing to know. Meet with her, kind of get that all like typed out, know what I'm looking for. And then we start to build the brand. We put ideas together like the mood board, and then we come back and we show her that. And I'm showing my boss that as well. I think I show him normally first, make sure he's on board, and then I show it to our DOFO and get any kind of feedback. But like it's gone really well in the past. Like they're normally very much on board. The only point of contention that we regularly have is that our coaching staff wants to see more brown, like always. Like they want brown backgrounds and stuff. And I'm not sold on it. I've been trying to incorporate more brown most of the time. But that is one thing that like we typically don't agree on. And that would be an example of me kind of putting my foot down like on that and being like, no, like the strength of our brand is in our orange. Brown is legibility. It's like adding in, it's an accent, but orange is our primary color and like leaning into that. So that would probably be an example of that like disconnect sometimes with with coaches. What kind of guidelines do you have coaches or interns who help with social media? So this document, I have one for like the department too. So those get sent out. And like I said, I meet regularly with everybody who is producing content. We have rules on the fonts, we have rules on the colors. And then I think the mood boards are probably one of the biggest pieces in helping them know what direction I want them to go in. Because it's like easy to explain in a paragraph what I want, but I don't think that, especially for people who are creatives and who like need to see something to know what you're talking about, at least that's how I am. I think seeing the mood board and seeing examples of what I'm talking about is really, really big. We have guidelines in terms of like, you can't use any other font. If you want to generate content for your team, you have to use Photoshop. So I don't let anybody use Canva. That's a stipulation. I know a lot of people do because it's a little bit easier, but I really believe that if you want to be a content creator and you want to kind of be involved, like you need to kind of learn the industry standard. And it's also just a way for us to moderate a little bit who does make content. Because if you don't want to learn how to use Photoshop and you don't want to use Photoshop, then we as a staff will just make sure we're taking care of your content needs. There's also guidelines on, the shade of orange and making sure that you're using the logo the right way, that it's ghosted the right way, that you're using it on the right backgrounds and all that kind of stuff that comes typically with that. But I would say the biggest guideline is just that I need to see stuff before it goes out. And if I'm not seeing what's going out before it goes out, then we have a meeting and we kind of discuss that. One primary point of contact is huge. Yeah, I agree. Having a primary point of contact is like one of the more important things with each team. I have worked with teams in the past with like different staffs where we didn't really have like one point of contact. and it could make things really complicated in terms of like too many cooks in the kitchen, for lack of a better way to put it. So having that one person who's speaking for the team or speaking for the coach has been so invaluable. Any other questions? I see a few people are typing, so I'm going to take a break from talking here for a second. You're probably tired of hearing my voice. How do you incorporate video into the brand? This is an excellent question, and I'm just now realizing that I did not mention video essentially at all. I'm not responsible for any of the video needs of our department across the board, unless it's like TikTok or like Instagram stories or something like that. I don't deal with it. We have a director of like video services, and he handles all of our video board content, any videos that are going out on a social media, all of that stuff. Now, that being said, him and I meet in the summer and we talk about kind of the evolution of the brand and where it's going to go and how do we adapt what I'm doing on social for video, so that, because it's a different world. So making sure that like while he's reflective of the brand on like the video board content, it still works for the video board, because not everything that I'm doing is going to be accessible from a video board standpoint. And then just a lot of it is just working together in collaboration and making sure that we're on the same page, going over things really early, being open and honest. We have lots of feedback. I keep pointing because his office is right next to mine, which is really handy. So just going over there and he's showing me what we're doing or what he's doing and all that kind of stuff. But he tries to be, I would say, like reflective too of like, say, the football follow the blueprint stuff. So he got a little bit like grittier last year and doing a lot more practice workout, like content of that kind of thing, playing into it the way that I was playing into it too. So I think that's really important, is just having all facets of your content kind of on the same page. How do you handle revisions in a timely manner and not doing too many? So this is something I don't always have to deal with. Obviously revisions for the most part, like if there's like a spelling error or like if I missed something, there's definitely that. So we do that, but with my department, I try not to give people too many revisions because I don't want to open that can of worms. We have a couple of teams who really, really like to be involved in the design process, which is awesome. But I try to kind of limit, again, it goes back to that thought of, is this a true concern for the representation of your team, or are you being nitpicky? And that can be kind of a hard line to find sometimes. And a lot of it is just communication with that coach and that person, like that point of contact. But I normally, if it's like just simple little revisions that kind of don't really have anything to do with the actual like content within the graphic, like if I got a stat wrong, I got a stat wrong. Or if from a teen standpoint, you're telling me that the way that I showed this stat in the graphic doesn't quite make sense, then that's something that I need to change because I am not as familiar with the sport as that point of contact is. But if it's something silly about like, they don't like where the header is, or they don't like how the H2 is like positioned, that's different. And normally I'll give them like 2 of those before I kind of draw the line and we're not doing that anymore and we're good and we need to move on with the graphic because I do have a lot of other things to get done. And I think sometimes when you drop that a little bit, like play that card of, well, coach, like I've got to move on. I have a lot of other projects. It kind of reminds them that they're not the only person counting on you and relying on you for their content needs. I hope that helped. Any more questions? Did I miss anything?
I see a few more typing. So Mallory, if you want to hang out and answer those, you can.
Yeah.
But guys, if you did not know before, you definitely know now how much of a rock star Mallory is. Just the amount of work that she has put in to make Bowling Green branding and design what it is today. So thank you, Mallory. Really appreciate it. Tons of great questions. I do want to point out we have another Academy session coming up next week. We'll be putting out that registration link here shortly. This is going to be with OSU's Brand Squad. If you're not familiar, they're doing a ton of great things for NIL with student athletes. It was created by their business school. They have a couple students at the school, and then someone who just graduated who is their brand squad president. And then Stephen Howard, if you know him from OSU, he's helping from the athletics side. And there are several athletes involved, and they've done a really good job at helping them just figure out branding from the student athlete perspective and how they can grow their personal brands. And then just basically kind of helping student athletes figure out where to find deals, stuff like that. So will be an awesome session next week. They're going to talk about how you can incorporate a brand squad at your own school. So definitely tune into that. Look for on Influencer Social. We'll start sharing those registration links here shortly. So Mallory, again, thank you so much. And we hope to see you guys all next week at the next session.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, guys.